Hello, Guy. Welcome back tonight. We journey past the golden masks and monumental pyramids, beyond the public histories, and into the shadows of the Nile Valley. We seek the hidden world of ancient Egypt, a realm of guarded knowledge, esoteric, rituals, and powerful groups who operated behind the veil of public life. These were not societies of equals, but hierarchies built on privileged access to the divine, to sacred texts, and to the very mechanics of the cosmos. We will uncover the secrets of the master magicians who wielded the power of creation itself, the immense influence of the priests of Amun-Ra, the arcane craft of the Embalmers, and the sacred, sworn duty of the royal tomb builders. These were the hidden pillars of an empire, shaping the destiny of the kingdom from the shadows. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the Egyptian worldview, the universe was not governed by cold, impersonal laws of physics, but by a delicate and ever-present web of divine energy. The gods had created the world from a chaotic primordial ocean, and it was their power that kept this chaos at bay, that made the sun rise each morning, and the Nile flood its banks each year. But this divine power was not entirely beyond the reach of mortals. The Egyptians believed in a force, a fundamental power that underpinned all of creation, the energy that the gods themselves used to work their will. They called this force Heka, a word that is often translated as magic, but which meant something far more profound. The active, creative force that could influence and shape reality itself. The individuals who sought to understand and wield this power, the scribes, the lector priests, and the magicians formed what might be considered Egypt's oldest and most fundamental secret society, the keepers of sacred words and rituals. Heka was not a fringe practice or a form of dark art. It was a legitimate and essential component of the Egyptian state and religion. It was present at the creation of the world, and it was a tool that enabled the gods to govern the cosmos. The sun god Ra journeyed across the sky each day in his solar bark, not by mechanics, but by the power of Heka, using its force to ward off the great chaos serpent, Apep, who tried to swallow the sun each night. Because humans were created in the image of the gods, they too could access and use Heka, albeit on a much smaller scale. To the Egyptians, there was no sharp distinction between religion, medicine, and magic. A doctor treating a fever might prescribe a medicinal plant, but he would also recite a magical incantation over the patient to banish the demon causing the illness. A priest performing a temple ritual was using Heka to please the gods. An architect designing a pyramid was embedding magical principles into its very structure to protect the pharaoh's soul. Heka was the invisible operating system of the Egyptian universe. The guardians and practitioners of this force were, first and foremost, the literate elite. In a society where only a tiny fraction of the population could read and write, the hieroglyphic script itself was considered magical. The very word for the script, medu-neter, meant the words of the gods. Each hieroglyphic sign was not just a phonetic or semantic value. It was a container of cosmic power. To write the name of a god was to invoke that god's presence. To write the name of an enemy and then ritually destroy. It was to destroy the enemy himself. The act of writing was an act of creation, a way of making things real and permanent. Therefore, the scribes, who spent years mastering the hundreds of complex signs and specialized schools, were the first level of initiates into the world of secret knowledge. They were the gatekeepers of the sacred texts, the administrative documents, and the medical and magical papyri that contained the accumulated wisdom of their civilization. At the highest level of this society of knowledge were the lector priests, the Kurheb. These were the true masters of the sacred texts. The lector priest was a common figure in the Egyptian court and temple, instantly recognizable in art by the scroll he held or the sash he wore across his chest. His role was to recite the powerful, ritualized utterances during religious ceremonies and funerary rites. When the foundation for a new temple was laid, it was the lector priest who recited the spells to purify the ground. During the mummification process, it was the lector priest who read the incantations to transform the deceased into a blessed spirit. Most importantly, it was the lector priest who was the master of the great collections of magical texts, which were stored in temple archives known as the House of Life. The House of Life, or Per-Ankh, was a scriptorium and library attached to a major temple, but it was far more than a simple repository of books. It was a center of immense intellectual and magical power, a kind of secret university where the most sacred knowledge was created, copied, and guarded. Here, scribes and priests compiled texts on theology, astronomy, medicine, and, of course, Heka. They created the great funerary compositions, like the pyramid text, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead, which were essentially magical guidebooks to the afterlife, filled with spells to help the deceased navigate its perils. The knowledge in the House of Life was not for public consumption. It was a jealously guarded secret, accessible only to the highest ranks of the priesthood and the royal court. The texts themselves were considered to have a powerful life of their own, and access to them was strictly controlled. The practice of Heka extended beyond the formal priesthood into the realm of professional magicians and healers. These individuals, both male and female, served the general population, offering remedies for snake bites, love potions, protective amulets, and curses against rivals. Their practice was based on the same principles as state magic, the power of the spoken word and the use of sympathetic magic. To perform a spell, a magician would often invoke the name of a powerful god, seeking to align himself with that god's authority. For example, a spell to heal a burn might begin with the magician declaring, "I am Horus ... thereby taking on the divine persona of the god who survived his own fiery trials. This was not seen as blasphemy, but as the proper and effective way to channel divine energy. The tools of the Egyptian magician were varied. Amulets were incredibly important, small objects that were believed to possess a specific magical property. The ankh was a powerful symbol of life, the jed pillar a symbol of stability, and the eye of Horus, or Wijit, a potent symbol of protection, healing, and restoration. These amulets were worn by the living and wrapped within the linen bandages of the dead. Magic wands, often carved from ivory and decorated with images of protective deities like the hippopotamus goddess Tauret or the dwarf god Bes, were used to draw magical circles and ward off evil spirits. Figurines or execration texts were another common tool. A magician would create a small clay figure representing an enemy, be it a human rival or a supernatural demon, and then ritually bind, break, or burn it to destroy the target's power. The secret knowledge of the keepers of Heka was recorded in a vast body of magical papyri, many of which have survived. Texts like the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus are primarily medical documents, but they are filled with magical incantations to be recited alongside the physical treatments. Other texts are purely magical, containing collections of spells for every imaginable purpose. The London Leiden Magical Papyrus from the later Greco-Roman period is a fascinating example of the endurance of these traditions, containing a mix of Egyptian, Greek, and other spells for everything from divination and dream interpretation to love charms and curses. These texts reveal a world of incredible complexity and detail. A spell had to be recited perfectly, using the correct words, the correct tone of voice, and the correct ritual gestures. The ingredients for a potion had to be gathered at the correct astrological time, and the amulet had to be made from the correct material. The slightest error could render the spell ineffective or, worse, make it backfire on the practitioner. This secret society of magicians and scribes was not an underground movement operating in opposition to the state. It was an integral part of the state's power structure. The Pharaoh himself was the supreme magician of the kingdom, the Heka, or Great of Magic. His magical potency was seen as essential for maintaining Mat, the cosmic principle of order and justice. He was the chief intermediary between the gods and humanity, and his rituals were the most powerful and important in the land. The magicians of his court served him, using their knowledge to protect his person, interpret his dreams, and curse his enemies. The story of Moses and Aaron confronting the magicians of Pharaoh's court in the book of Exodus, while a biblical narrative, reflects the very real Egyptian belief in the power and presence of these court magicians. The knowledge of Heka was a source of immense power and prestige, but it was also dangerous. The Egyptians believed that the world was filled with malevolent spirits, ghosts of the restless dead, and terrifying demons who could bring disease, misfortune, and death. It was the job of the magician to confront these entities, to know their secret names and their weaknesses, and to have the power to banish them. This required immense courage and deep esoteric knowledge. The secret society of the keepers of Heka was therefore a bulwark that protected the ordered world of Egypt from the chaotic and hostile forces of the supernatural. They were the guardians of the sacred words, the masters of ritual, and the wielders of the very force that held their universe together. Their secrets were the keys to life, death, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Within the complex hierarchy of Egyptian society, no group wielded more power, commanded more wealth, or guarded its secrets more jealously than the priesthood of the great state gods. And among these divine cults, none was more powerful or more influential than the priesthood of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. From their magnificent temple complex at Karnak in the capital city of Thebes, the priests of Amun-Ra presided over a vast religious and economic empire. They were not just humble servants of the divine, but shrewd politicians, wealthy landowners, and the keepers of the deepest theological secrets of the Egyptian state. To be a priest of Amun-Ra was to be a member of an exclusive and powerful brotherhood, and initiate into the inner sanctum of the kingdom's most important cult, a secret society whose influence often rivaled that of the pharaoh himself. The god Amun, whose name means the Hidden One, began as a minor local deity of the city of Thebes. With the rise of the Theban pharaohs at the beginning of the new kingdom around 1550 BCE, Amun was elevated to the status of a national god. To solidify his position, he was syncretized with the ancient northern sun god, Ra, creating the all-powerful deity Amun-Ra. He was hailed as the creator of the universe, the sustainer of life, and the divine father of the pharaoh. The victorious pharaohs of the 18th dynasty attributed their military successes and the immense wealth of their empire to Amun-Ra, and they showed their gratitude by lavishing the god's cult with a staggering amount of tribute, land, and slaves. This transformed the cult of Amun-Ra into the most powerful economic institution in the country, a state within a state. The nerve center of this empire was the temple at Karnak. This was not a single building, but a vast, sprawling complex of temples, pylons, chapels, and obelisks built, added to, and embellished by successive pharaohs over 2,000 years. It was the largest religious complex ever built, a city of the gods on earth. The entire complex was designed as a microcosm of the Egyptian universe. The great hypostyle hall, with its forest of 134 massive papyrus-shaped columns, represented the primeval swamp of creation. The ceiling was painted with stars representing the sky, and the floor represented the fertile earth. The temple was a machine for maintaining the cosmos, and only the initiated priests knew how to operate it. Access to this sacred space was strictly hierarchical, a series of concentric circles of secrecy and purity. The general public was only allowed into the outermost open courts, and only during major festivals. Lower-ranking officials and priests could proceed further into the hypostyle hall, but the innermost sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, which contained the cult statue of the god himself, was a place of absolute darkness and secrecy. Only the pharaoh and the highest-ranking priest, the high priest of Amun, were permitted to enter this sacred space. This architectural hierarchy was a physical manifestation of the cult's secrecy. Knowledge and access to the divine were privileges, not rights, granted only to those who had been properly initiated and purified. The daily life of the god within the temple was a series of secret rituals performed by the priests. The cult statue, made of gold and precious stones, was not seen as a mere symbol of the god, but as the literal dwelling place of the god's spirit, or Ba. Each morning, in a ceremony known as the opening of the mouth, the high priest would enter the sanctuary, break the clay seal on the doors, and ritually awaken the god. He would wash, clothe, and anoint the statue with perfumes, and present it with offerings of the finest food and drink. The god was believed to magically consume the spiritual essence of the food, after which the physical food itself was reverted and distributed among the priests as their daily rations. These rituals were performed in absolute secrecy, the details of the liturgy and the incantations known only to the priests. This secret knowledge was their primary source of power. They were the ones who knew how to care for the god, how to please him and how to interpret his will. The priesthood of Amun-Ra was a highly organized and complex bureaucracy. At its head was the High Priest of Amun, a title that translates as First Prophet of Amun. This was one of the most powerful positions in all of Egypt, often second only to the Pharaoh. The High Priest was not just a religious leader, but a major political figure, overseeing the vast estates, workshops, and treasuries of the temple. Below him were the second, third, and fourth prophets of Amun, who served as his deputies. Under them were the father priests and a large body of lower-ranking wab priests, or pure ones, who carried out the daily tasks of the temple. Purity was an absolute obsession. Priests were required to be circumcised, to shave their entire bodies every few days, and to wash themselves multiple times a day in the temple's sacred lake. They had to adhere to strict dietary laws and maintain a state of ritual purity to be worthy of entering the god's presence. One of the most important and secret functions of the priesthood was their role in communicating the god's will through oracles. During major public festivals, like the beautiful Feast of the Opet, the cult statue of Amun would be placed in a sacred bark and carried on the shoulders of the priests out of the temple. As the procession moved through the crowds, people could ask questions of the god. The priests carrying the bark would cause it to tilt forward or backward, or turn to one side, indicating a yes or no answer from the god. While this was a public spectacle, the process was entirely controlled by the priests, who were hidden from view within the bark's cabin. This gave the priesthood immense power to influence political events, legitimize royal successions, approve military campaigns, and even condemn individuals to death, all under the unassailable authority of the god's will. The economic power of the Amun cult was staggering. The temple owned vast tracts of the most fertile agricultural land in Egypt, huge herds of cattle, fleets of trading ships, and the rights to the output of mines and quarries. All of this wealth was managed by the temple bureaucracy, making the high priest of Amun a de facto treasurer of a significant portion of the nation's GDP. This immense wealth and influence inevitably led to a clash with the throne. The Pharaohs of the mid-18th dynasty, particularly Akhenaten, saw the power of the Amun priesthood as a direct threat to their own authority. Akhenaten's radical decision to abandon the entire traditional pantheon in favor of the worship of a single god, the Aten, and to move the capital away from Thebes, was in large part a political move designed to break the power of the Amun priesthood once and for all. But this revolution was short-lived. After Akhenaten's death, his successors, including Tutankhamun, were forced to restore the old gods, and the Amun priesthood returned to power, more influential than ever. The deepest secrets of the priesthood were theological, while the public religion was a complex world of hundreds of gods. The priests of Amun-Ra developed a sophisticated and almost monotheistic theology in their inner sanctums. They came to see Amun-Ra not just as the king of the gods, but as the ultimate, transcendent creator god, the hidden source of all creation, from which all other gods were merely manifestations. A hymn to Amun from this period reads, "All gods are three, Amun, Ra, and Pata, and there is no second to them. Hidden is his name as Amun, he is ray and face, and his body is Pata." This complex, syncretic theology, which synthesized the major creator gods into a single, triune being, was esoteric knowledge discussed and debated within the walls of the House of Life. A secret doctrine far too complex for the common populace. The power of the priesthood of Amun-Ra reached its apex during the Third Intermediate Period, after the collapse of the New Kingdom. The high priests of Amun at Thebes became de facto rulers of southern Egypt, styling themselves as kings and passing their office from father to son, effectively creating a theocratic state. They had transformed their secret knowledge and their economic power into direct political authority, demonstrating the ultimate success of their long-term strategy. The priesthood of Amun-Ra was far more than a religious cult. It was a powerful, self-perpetuating corporation, a secret society of initiates who used their monopoly on divine communication and their immense wealth to shape the course of Egyptian history for over 1,000 years. Of all the gods of the Egyptian pantheon, none held a more intimate or profound place in the hearts of the people than Osiris. He was not a distant cosmic creator god like Amun-Ra, but a god who had lived, died, and been resurrected, a deity who offered the promise of eternal life to all who followed him. His story, a dramatic tale of love, betrayal, death, and triumphant rebirth, formed the basis of the most widespread and enduring mystery cult in ancient Egypt. The mysteries of Osiris were a series of secret rituals and beliefs that provided a spiritual path to salvation, a way for mortals to overcome the finality of death and be reborn into the paradise of the afterlife. While the cult had public festivals, its core teachings were secret, revealed only to initiates who sought to share in the god's victory over death. This made the followers of Osiris a vast and inclusive secret society, united by a shared hope for resurrection. The myth of Osiris was the foundational charter of the cult. The story tells that Osiris was a wise and benevolent primeval king who brought civilization to Egypt, teaching the people agriculture and law. His jealous brother Set, the god of chaos and the desert, plotted against him. Set secretly obtained the measurements of Osiris's body and had a beautiful chest made to his exact dimensions. At a great banquet, Set offered this magnificent chest as a prize to whoever could fit inside it perfectly. One by one, the guests tried and failed. Finally, Osiris himself lay down in the chest. Instantly, Set and his co-conspirators slammed the lid shut, sealed it with lead, and threw it into the Nile. The chest, now Osiris's coffin, floated down the river and out to sea, eventually coming ashore in the city of Byblus in Phoenicia, where a sacred tree grew around it. Isis, Osiris's devoted wife and sister, was overcome with grief. She searched tirelessly for her husband's body, and after a long journey, she found the chest in Byblus and brought it back to Egypt. She hid the body in the marshes of the Nile Delta, but Set, while hunting, discovered the chest. In a rage, he dismembered Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scattered them throughout the land of Egypt. Undeterred, the faithful Isis, accompanied by her sister Nephthys, transformed into birds and flew across Egypt, searching for the scattered pieces of her beloved. She managed to find 13 of the pieces, but the 14th, the phallus, had been eaten by a fish in the Nile. Using her magic, Isis fashioned a replacement phallus and, with the help of the jackal-headed god Anubis, she carefully reassembled the body of Osiris, wrapping it in linen bandages and performing the first rites of embalming. She then transformed into a kite, a type of bird, and hovered over the body of her restored husband, fanning the breath of life back into him with her wings and conceiving their son, Horus. Osiris was thus resurrected, but because he was incomplete, he could no longer rule in the land of the living. He descended into the underworld, where he became the just and merciful king of the dead, the lord of the afterlife. His son Horus grew up to avenge him, eventually defeating Set in a series of great battles and claiming his rightful place as the king of the living. This powerful myth resonated on multiple levels. On a cosmic scale, it represented the eternal struggle between order Mat, embodied by Osiris and Horus, and chaos Isfet, embodied by Set. On an agricultural level, the death and rebirth of Osiris mirrored the annual cycle of the crops, which die and are buried as seeds before being reborn in the harvest. And most importantly, on a personal level, it offered a model for salvation. Just as Osiris had been resurrected through the magic of Isis and the rites of Anubis, so too could any mortal, if they were properly prepared and deemed worthy, be resurrected and become one with Osiris in the afterlife. The center of the Osirian cult was the city of Abydos in southern Egypt. It was believed that the head of Osiris was buried at Abydos, making it the most sacred ground in the entire country. To be buried at Abydos was the ultimate goal for any pious Egyptian, as it placed them in direct proximity to the god of resurrection. For those who could not afford a tomb there, it was common to erect a cenotaph or a memorial stela at the site to ensure that their name and spirit would be present at the great festivals. The most important of these was the annual Great Festival of Osiris at Abydos. This was a massive, multi-day public event that was part passion play, part pilgrimage. The festival reenacted the central events of the Osirian myth. There were public processions, mock battles between the followers of Horus and the followers of Set, and the erection of the Djed pillar, a symbol of Osiris's spine and his stable, resurrected form. The climax of the festival was a secret nocturnal ritual known as the Mysteries, which took place within the temple walls and was open only to initiated priests. We know very little about the precise details of these rituals, as the initiates were sworn to secrecy. However, from scattered texts and reliefs, it seems they involve the ritual fashioning and burial of a small effigy of Osiris, made from barley and sand, which was then watered. The sprouting of the barley from the effigy was a potent and tangible symbol of the god's resurrection and the promise of new life. This Osiris bed or corn mummy was a powerful piece of sympathetic magic, a secret rite that magically ensured the fertility of the land and the resurrection of the dead dot to become an initiate and share in Osiris's eternal life. An individual had to fulfill two conditions. Their body had to be properly preserved through mummification, mirroring the work of Anubis, and their soul had to be judged worthy in the afterlife. The Egyptian conception of the soul was complex, but the two most important parts were the Ka, or life force, and the Ba, or individual personality. After death, the Ba, depicted as a human-headed bird, would fly from the tomb during the day, but had to return to the mummified body at night. The ultimate goal was for the Ka and Ba to be reunited in the afterlife and transformed into an Akh, a blessed and effective spirit. This transformation depended on passing the final judgment. The great funerary texts, most notably the Book of the Dead, provided the deceased with the secret knowledge needed for this trial. Chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead describes the weighing of the heart. The deceased would be led by Anubis into the Hall of Two Truths, where their heart, the seat of their conscience, would be weighed on a great scale against a feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and justice. The deceased had to make a negative confession, declaring to a tribunal of 42 divine judges that they were innocent of a long list of sins. I have not committed sin. I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not killed men and women ... I have not told lies. While the heart was being weighed, the great ibis-headed god Thoth, the scribe of the gods, would record the verdict. If the heart was lighter than or equal in weight to the feather, the deceased was declared true of voice and was led by Horus into the presence of Osiris to begin their eternal life in the field of reeds, a blissful, idealized version of Egypt. If the heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by the terrifying demon Ammit, the devourer of the dead, a composite monster that was part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus. This meant the second death, the complete and utter annihilation of the soul. The mysteries of Osiris, therefore, provided not only a ritual path to immortality, but also a moral and ethical framework for life on earth. The knowledge of the final judgment encouraged people to live a life in accordance with Mat. The secrets of the cult were not just about ritual formulas, but about how to live a righteous life that would be rewarded in the next. This promise of a just afterlife, available to anyone regardless of their social status, as long as they were virtuous and could afford the proper burial rites, was a powerful and deeply appealing message. It made the cult of Osiris the most personal and democratic form of religion in ancient Egypt. The influence of the Osirian mysteries was profound and long-lasting. During the Greco-Roman period, the cult of Isis and Osiris spread throughout the Mediterranean world, becoming one of the most popular and respected of all the mystery religions of the Roman Empire. Temples to Isis were established in Rome itself, in Pompeii, and as far away as London. The Roman writer Apuleius, in his novel The Golden Ass, provides a vivid, albeit fictionalized, account of an initiation into the mysteries of Isis, describing it as a voluntary death and a salvation, a journey through the elements to behold the gods face to face. The secret society of the followers of Osiris was a vast and diverse one, bound together by a shared mythology and a common hope. They believed that death was not an end, but a transition, a doorway to a new and eternal existence. Through the secret knowledge contained in their sacred texts and the performance of the proper rituals, they sought to emulate their resurrected God, to pass the final judgment, and to be reborn into the light. It was a secret society that embraced the entire nation, offering a profound and deeply human answer to the eternal question of what lies beyond the grave. In the Egyptian quest for eternal life, no practice was more central or more shrouded in secrecy than the art of mummification. The preservation of the physical body was considered an absolute prerequisite for survival in the afterlife. It was the anchor to which the spiritual aspects of the deceased, the Ka and the Ba, had to return each night. To destroy the body was to risk the second death, the complete annihilation of the soul. The men who carried out this sacred and essential task, the Embalmers, were members of a highly specialized and secretive profession. They were the servants of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, and their craft was a complex blend of surgical skill, chemical knowledge, and profound ritual magic. Its techniques and incantations a closely guarded secret passed down through generations. They were a society set apart, working in the space between the living and the dead. Their work both feared and revered by all. The practice of mummification evolved over thousands of years. In the pre-dynastic period, the dead were simply buried in shallow pits in the desert. The hot, dry sand would naturally desiccate the bodies, creating simple, natural mummies. The Egyptians likely observed this phenomenon and came to associate physical preservation with survival after death. However, as burial practices became more elaborate, with the dead being placed in coffins and tombs, the bodies were no longer in direct contact with the sand, and they would decompose. This created a theological crisis and spurred the development of artificial mummification techniques to replicate and improve upon the work of nature. By the time of the New Kingdom, the art of the embalmer had reached its zenith, a sophisticated 70-day process that was a marvel of ancient science and religion. The embalmer's workshop, the wabat or pure place, was typically a temporary tent or a permanent structure located near the necropolis, on the west bank of the Nile, the land of the dead. It was a place of powerful taboos, simultaneously a sacred laboratory and a ritually unclean space due to its association with death. The men who worked there were a special class of priests and technicians. The head of the workshop was the overseer of the mysteries, a high-ranking priest who directed the entire process. The most important ritual role was that of the priest who wore a mask of the jackal god Anubis, symbolically becoming the god of embalming himself during the rites. Other specialists included the slicer, who made the incision in the body, and the hairy seshta, the master of secrets, who knew the precise proportions of the chemical salts and resins. Our most detailed written account of the process comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE. He described 3 different grades of mummification, available according to what a family could afford. The most expensive and elaborate method reserved for the pharaohs, and the highest elite was a painstaking process. The first and most critical step was the removal of the internal organs, which were the first to decay. The brain was removed through the nostrils using a long, hooked bronze rod. The embalmers would break through the thin ethmoid bone at the top of the nasal cavity and then liquefy the brain by whisking it, allowing it to be drained out. It was a delicate procedure that required great skill to avoid disfiguring the face. The Egyptians did not consider the brain to be important. For them, the heart was the seat of intelligence and conscience, and it was almost always left in place, within the body, as it would be needed for the final judgment. Next, the slicer would make a small incision in the left flank of the abdomen using a sharp blade of obsidian, a stone considered to have ritual purity. Through this incision, the embalmers would remove the stomach, the intestines, the liver, and the lungs. These organs were not discarded. They were washed with palm wine, which acted as a disinfectant and then carefully preserved separately. They were dried and then either bundled and placed back inside the body cavity or, more commonly, stored in 4 special containers known as canopic jars. Each jar was protected by one of the 4 sons of Horus. Imseti, human-headed, guarded the liver. Hapi, baboon-headed, guarded the lungs. Duamutef, jackal-headed, guarded the stomach. And Kebsenuf, falcon-headed, guarded the intestines. Canopic jars were an essential part of the funerary equipment, ensuring that the deceased would be whole and complete in the afterlife. Once the body cavity was empty, it was thoroughly cleaned and sterilized with palm wine and infusions of spices. The real secret to Egyptian mummification then began: the dehydration of the body. The body was completely covered, inside and out, with natron, a natural salt mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, which was harvested from the dry lake beds of the Wadi el-Matron. Natron was a powerful desiccant, and it would draw all the moisture out of the body's tissues, preventing the growth of the bacteria that cause decay. The body would be left buried in a pile of natron for 40 days, a period of ritual purification and transformation. After the 40 days were complete, the now shrunken and desiccated body was taken from the natron pile. It was washed, anointed, with a complex series of fragrant oils and resins, and its skin was treated to make it more supple. The empty body cavity was then packed with linen, sawdust, and other materials to restore a more lifelike shape, and the incision in the flank was sewn up and covered with a plaque, often bearing the protective eye of Horus. The final and most time-consuming stage was the wrapping. The body was meticulously wrapped in hundreds of yards of fine linen bandages. This was a complex, ritualized process, with each limb, finger, and toe being wrapped individually. Priests would recite magical spells as the wrapping progressed, and dozens of protective amulets, such as the heart scarab, the ankh, and the jed pillar, would be placed at specific locations within the bandages. The heart scarab was particularly important. It was placed over the heart and was inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, Chapter 3, O.B., which instructed the heart not to bear witness against the deceased during the final judgment. The entire wrapping process could take up to 15 days. Finally, a funerary mask, made of cartonnage, or in the case of a pharaoh like Tutankhamun, solid gold, was placed over the head and shoulders, and the completed mummy was placed in its series of nested coffins and sarcophagi, ready for the funeral. The secrets of the embalmers were not just chemical and surgical. They were deeply magical. Every step of the process was accompanied by the recitation of specific litanies and spells. The embalmers were not just technicians. They were ritual specialists who were magically transforming a dead human corpse into an immortal divine vessel. Asa. Their knowledge of these spells, the precise mixtures of resins, and the correct placement of amulets was a trade secret of the highest order. This knowledge was likely passed down from master to apprentice within a closed guild or family, ensuring their monopoly on the sacred craft. The texts containing this information would have been among the most secret documents in the House of Life. The Society of Embalmers was one of deep paradox. They performed the most sacred and necessary service for ensuring eternal life, yet their work with dead bodies made them ritually impure. They likely lived and worked in a separate community on the edge of the necropolis, set apart from the general population. They were both respected for their divine knowledge and likely shunned for their daily contact with death. They were the ultimate insiders, possessing the keys to immortality, and the ultimate outsiders, living on the fringes of society. For nearly 3,000 years, the servants of Anubis practiced their secret craft, perfecting their techniques and guarding their knowledge. They were a silent and essential pillar of Egyptian civilization, a secret society whose work allowed for the central promise of their religion to be fulfilled. In their dark and fragrant workshops, they worked to defeat the forces of decay and chaos, transforming mortal flesh into an eternal vessel, ensuring that the pharaohs and their subjects could make the perilous journey into the underworld and be reborn into the light of the field of reeds. In a hidden, sun-scorched valley on the west bank of the Nile, nestled in the desolate hills behind the Theban necropolis, lay one of ancient Egypt's most remarkable and secret communities. This was the village of Deir el-Medina, a place whose ancient name was Set Mat, the place of truth. For nearly 500 years during the New Kingdom, this was the home of a highly specialized and elite group of artisans, craftsmen, and laborers. Their job, and the reason for their existence, was one of the most secret and sacred tasks in the entire kingdom: to quarry, construct, and lavishly decorate the hidden, underground tombs of the pharaohs and their queens in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. The men of Deir el-Medina were the builders of eternity, a secret society of artists and engineers, deliberately isolated from the outside world to protect the security of the royal afterlife. The remarkably well-preserved remains of their village and the thousands of documents they left behind have given us an unprecedented, intimate glimpse into the daily lives of these ancient Egyptian commoners. The village was founded in the early 18th dynasty, around the reign of Thutmose I, the first pharaoh to choose the remote and secret Valley of the Kings as his final resting place. The decision to move the royal burials from the highly visible pyramids of the Old Kingdom to hidden, rock-cut tombs was a response to the rampant tomb robbing that had desecrated the graves of their ancestors. Secrecy was now the primary defense. To ensure this secrecy, the state established the community of Deir el-Medina. The village was intentionally located in a natural, bowl-shaped desert valley, hidden from the Nile and accessible only through a guarded mountain path. The workers were housed here with their families, physically and socially isolated from the rest of the Egyptian population, to prevent the location and plans of the royal tombs from being leaked. The village itself was a planned community, laid out on a grid and surrounded by a high enclosure wall. Inside were around 70 stone-built houses, packed tightly together along a central street. The houses were modest but comfortable, with several rooms, a cellar, and a rooftop terrace for sleeping on hot nights. The community was entirely state-supported. The men who worked on the tombs were not slaves, but highly paid and respected state employees. They were paid in rations of grain for bread and beer, fish, vegetables, and other commodities delivered regularly by the state. This system of payment is known in great detail from the thousands of ostraca, flakes of limestone or pottery, used as a kind of ancient notepad that the villagers left behind. These ostraka record everything from work logs and ration lists to personal letters, legal disputes, and even love poems and doodles, providing a rich and personal texture to the lives of these ancient people that is almost unparalleled. The workforce was a permanent institution divided into two gangs or crews, one for the left side of the tomb and one for the right, each with its own foreman and deputy. The crews would work an 8-day week, camping in huts high in the Valley of the Kings during their work period, before returning to the village for a 2-day weekend with their families. The work itself was arduous and highly skilled. It began with the quarrymen, who would use bronze chisels and stone pounders to painstakingly cut the long corridors and chambers of the tomb deep into the limestone cliffs. This was back-breaking work done in the dark, stuffy confines of the tomb, lit only by the smoky, flickering light of oil lamps. Once a chamber was cut, the plasterers would move in, covering the rough walls with a smooth layer of gypsum plaster. Then came the draftsmen, the master artists who would sketch out the complex religious scenes and hieroglyphic texts onto the walls in red and black ink. Finally, the painters would apply the brilliant colors, mineral pigments of red, yellow, blue, green, and black, bringing the world of the gods and the afterlife to vibrant life. The scenes they painted were drawn from sacred texts like the Book of the Dead, the Amduat, and the Book of Gates, depicting the Pharaoh's perilous journey through the underworld and his triumphant rebirth. The skill of these artisans was extraordinary. The tombs they created are some of the greatest artistic masterpieces of the ancient world. Their techniques, particularly the specific proportions of their artistic canon and the meaning of their complex iconography, were a form of secret professional knowledge passed down from father to son within the community. Life in Deir el-Medina was a world unto itself. The community was self-governing to a large extent, with its own court of law, made up of the foreman and the village scribe, who would hear and judge local disputes, from arguments over property to accusations of adultery. They also had a rich religious life, worshiping not only the great state gods, but also their own local patron deities, including the deified Pharaoh Amenhotep I, the founder of their community, and the cobra goddess Meretseger, the she-who loves silence, a powerful and sometimes fearsome goddess who is believed to protect the royal necropolis. Despite their isolation and their privileged position as state employees, the lives of the workmen were not always easy. The ostraka record numerous instances of labor disputes and strikes. In one famous case from the reign of Ramesses III, the state bureaucracy had become so corrupt and inefficient that the regular grain rations for the workmen failed to arrive. For several months, faced with starvation, the workmen took the unprecedented step of going on strike. They laid down their tools, marched out of the village, and occupied the major mortuary temples on the west bank, chanting, "We are hungry." This was the first recorded labor strike in history, a courageous act of collective bargaining that eventually shamed the officials into delivering the overdue rations. The most important secret the men of Deir el-Medina had to keep was, of course, the location of the tombs. Yet the great irony of Deir el-Medina is that despite all the precautions, the secrecy eventually failed. During the period of social and economic collapse at the end of the New Kingdom, the state's ability to guard the necropolis and pay the workmen broke down, it was likely the descendants of the very men who had built the tombs who became the most proficient and successful tomb robbers. Armed with intimate inherited knowledge of the tombs' locations and their complex internal layouts, they were able to bypass the secret doors and sealed corridors to plunder the immense golden treasures that lay within. The court records from this period, such as the Abbot Papyrus, detail the trials of several gangs of tomb robbers, some of whom were from the village, providing a dramatic end to the community's long history. By the end of the 20th dynasty, the Valley of the Kings was largely abandoned as a royal burial ground, and the village of Deir el-Medina was slowly deserted, its purpose gone. For nearly 3,000 years it lay buried under the desert sands. Its excavation has provided a unique window into a secret world. It reveals the lives of the common Egyptians who toiled in the service of their god-kings, the artists who created the masterpieces of the afterlife. The men of Deir el-Medina were a community bound by a shared, sacred, and secret duty. They were the anonymous builders of eternity, and in the documents and artifacts they left behind, they, unlike the pharaohs they served, achieved a very real and very human kind of immortality. The stability of the Egyptian state and the personal security of the pharaoh, the living god on earth, depended on more than just divine authority, priestly rituals, and the loyalty of the court. It required a physical force, a group of skilled and trusted individuals who could police the bustling cities, guard the sacred and secret sites of the necropolis, and act as the king's eyes and ears throughout the land. During the New Kingdom, the golden age of Egypt's imperial power, this crucial role was filled by an elite paramilitary force known as the Medjay, originally a name for a specific ethnic group from the deserts of Nubia. The term Medjay evolved over time to become the professional title for a specialized police and security force, a kind of secret service tasked with protecting the kingdom's most sensitive assets and secrets. The Medjay were a brotherhood of warriors, a society defined by its unique skills, its unwavering loyalty to the pharaoh, and its solemn role as the guardians of Egypt's eternal order. The original Medjay were a nomadic people from the eastern desert in the land of Nubia to the south of Egypt. For centuries, they had a complex and shifting relationship with the powerful Egyptian state. They were a people of the harsh, arid lands, known for their toughness, their resilience, and their mastery of survival in an unforgiving environment. To the Egyptians, they were renowned for their skills as trackers, their deadly accuracy as archers, and their intimate knowledge of the desert terrain. This made them both a potential threat and a valuable resource. For much of their early history, they served as mercenaries and scouts in the Egyptian army, their skills highly prized by pharaohs campaigning in the south or protecting desert trade routes. At other times, they were seen as enemies, a source of raids and conflict on the southern border. Their transformation from a tribal mercenary group into a cornerstone of state security began during one of the most chaotic periods in Egyptian history, the Second Intermediate Period. During this time, the central authority of the pharaohs had collapsed. Northern Egypt was ruled by a dynasty of foreign kings known as the Hyksos, who had settled in the Nile Delta. The south was controlled by native Egyptian princes based in the city of Thebes. As these Theban princes began the long and bloody struggled to reunify the country, they looked south for military support. They began to recruit these Nubian Medjay warriors into their armies in large numbers. The Medjay proved to be incredibly effective and fiercely loyal soldiers, and they played a key role in the pivotal wars of liberation waged by the Pharaohs Kamose and Amun-Ra, which ultimately succeeded in expelling the Hyksos and establishing the glorious 18th dynasty and the new kingdom. As a reward for their loyalty and in recognition of their unique and valuable skills, the new pharaohs of the new kingdom transformed the Medjay from a simple mercenary contingent into an elite internal security force. The term Medjay was no longer just an ethnic label. It became a professional title, a mark of honor and distinction. The force was opened up to both Nubians and Egyptians who proved themselves worthy, creating a professional organization bound by oath and duty rather than tribal affiliation. They became, in effect, the national police force of Egypt, with a wide and varied range of responsibilities. In the bustling cities of Thebes and Memphis, the Medjay were responsible for maintaining public order. They patrolled the streets, guarded important administrative buildings like the vizier's office and the state granaries, and worked to prevent crime. They were the visible presence of the state's authority, and their reputation for toughness would have been a powerful deterrent to petty criminals and would-be troublemakers. But their most important and secret roles lay far from the crowds. In the desolate, sun-blasted landscapes of the Theban necropolis on the west bank of the Nile, the immense treasures of gold, silver, and precious stones buried with the pharaohs in the hidden tombs of the Valley of the Kings were a constant and irresistible temptation for tomb robbers. Protecting these sacred and secret tombs was a matter of the highest state security and religious importance, and this solemn task fell to the Medjay. They established checkpoints and guard posts on the paths leading into the valley, ensuring that only authorized personnel could enter. They patrolled the barren, silent hills of the necropolis day and night, their senses honed to the subtle signs of illicit activity. They were expert trackers, able to spot the slightest disturbance in the sand that might indicate the digging of a robber's tunnel or the movement of stolen goods. Their fearsome reputation and their skill with the bow meant that any robber who was caught would face swift and brutal justice. They also served as the primary guards for the secret village of Deir el-Medina, the home of the royal tomb builders. They manned the gates of the village, ensuring that the workers remained isolated from the general population and that the precious secrets of the tombs, locations, and their complex internal layouts were protected. The Medjay also served as the guardians of Egypt's borders, particularly the southern frontier with Nubia, the very land of their origin. They manned the great fortified garrisons that marked the edge of Egyptian territory. They patrolled the desert trade routes that brought the wealth of Africa, gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals into Egypt, and they protected the valuable mining and quarrying expeditions sent out by the pharaoh. In this role, they were part border patrol, part customs agents, and part intelligence network, gathering information on the movements of desert tribes and potential threats to the kingdom. The organization of the Medjay was hierarchical, with a rigid chain of command that mirrored the army. The entire force was led by a chief of the Medjay, who was often a high-ranking official and a close confidant of the vizier or even the pharaoh himself. Under him were captains and deputies who commanded local units in different parts of the country. The Medjay developed their own distinct identity, setting them apart from the regular army. They are often depicted in tomb paintings and reliefs as wearing their own unique uniforms, often a distinctive kilt and a particular style of headdress. They carried their signature weapons, the powerful Egyptian composite bow, the battle axe, and a distinctive long staff or pole that served as a badge of office. This clear visual identity set them apart from the rest of the population, marking them as a special and elite force. The Pharaoh's trusted enforcers dot as the personal guardians of the Pharaoh and the protectors of the kingdom's most sacred and secret places. The Medjay were privy to a great deal of highly sensitive information. They knew the locations of the royal tombs, the schedules of treasure shipments from the mines, and the security arrangements of the palace. Their loyalty was therefore paramount. The state went to great lengths to ensure this loyalty through a combination of generous rewards and powerful ideology. The Medjay were well paid, they were respected, and they were given a position of honor and trust within the state. They were also deeply integrated into the Egyptian religious worldview. They were taught to see themselves not just as guards, but as the protectors of Ma'at, the divine principle of cosmic order, truth, and justice. They were the warriors who fought against the forces of chaos, Isfet, that threatened the stability of the kingdom, whether that chaos came in the form of foreign enemies, desert raiders, or common tomb robbers. To betray their oath was not just a crime. It was a sacrilege, a sin against the gods and the entire cosmic order. The thousands of ostraca and papyri found at Deir el-Medina provide a fascinating and intimate insight into the daily interactions between the Medjay and the tomb builders they guarded. While their official role was to police the community and enforce the rules of secrecy, the relationship was often far more complex. The Medjay were a constant presence in the villagers' lives. The documents record them investigating the theft of tools, settling disputes between neighbors, and even being called upon to witness legal agreements. They were the human face of the state's authority, and their effectiveness depended on building a relationship of trust as well as fear with the community they were tasked to control. The crucial role of the Medjay became even more apparent during the turbulent period of social and economic collapse at the end of the New Kingdom. As the central authority of the Pharaoh weakened, the state's ability to provide for its people and maintain order began to break down. Lawlessness increased, and a wave of systematic tomb robberies swept through the Valley of the Kings. The surviving court documents from the tomb robbery trials of this era, such as the famous Abbot Papyrus, reveal the Medjay in action. We see them investigating the crimes, tracking down the culprits, and torturing confessions out of them using methods like the bastinado, beating the soles of the feet. These dramatic texts show the immense pressure the Medjay were under to protect the necropolis in a time of social collapse. They also hint at the corruption that began to infect the entire system, with some high-ranking officials and even some Medjay themselves being implicated in the very crimes they were supposed to be preventing. After the end of the New Kingdom and the beginning of the Third Intermediate Period, the term Medjay gradually fell out of use as the organization was restructured and absorbed into other military and police units under the new Libyan and Kushite pharaohs. But the legacy of this elite force endured. For 500 of Egypt's most glorious years, they had been the silent guardians of the Pharaoh's secrets and the steadfast enforcers of his authority. They were a unique society within Egyptian culture, a brotherhood of warriors defined by their foreign origins, their specialized skills in archery and tracking, and their sacred duty to protect the king and his eternal resting place. They were the thin line of order that separated the fertile, civilized world of the Nile Valley from the chaos of the desert and the criminal underworld. The Medjay were the indispensable secret police who ensured that the builders of eternity could do their work in peace and that the gods on earth could sleep and wake in eternal security. In the civilization of ancient Egypt, true power resided not in gold or in armies, but in knowledge. In a world governed by a complex and often inscrutable web of divine forces, the ability to read the sacred texts, to understand the movements of the stars, to interpret the will of the gods, and to master the arcane arts of medicine and magic was the ultimate source of authority. This precious, powerful knowledge was not available to all. It was a closely guarded secret, cultivated, protected, and preserved in special institutions that were the intellectual and spiritual powerhouses of the Egyptian kingdom. These institutions were known as the Pharaohs, the House of Life, part scriptorium, part library, part university, and part magical laboratory. The House of Life was the exclusive domain of Egypt's intellectual elite. It was a true secret society, a fraternity of scribes, priests, and scholars who were responsible for creating, codifying, and protecting the very foundations of Egyptian civilization, knowledge they believed was essential for the survival of the cosmos itself. A House of Life was attached to all the major temples throughout Egypt, with particularly famous ones located at Abydos, Memphis, and Thebes. There was also likely a central Pharaoh associated with the royal residence. These were not public institutions in any sense. Access was strictly limited to the initiated, the highest ranks of the priesthood and the most skilled members of the scribal bureaucracy. To step inside a House of Life was to enter the inner sanctum of the nation's intellect. One can imagine a series of quiet, sunlit courtyards and cool, dark chambers. In one room, scribes would be bent over low desks, their reed brushes flying across sheets of fresh papyrus as they meticulously copied ancient religious texts. In another, lector priests would be engaged in deep theological debate, arguing the finer points of a god's nature or the meaning of a passage from a funerary scroll. There might be a house of books, a library with wooden chests filled with priceless papyrus scrolls, neatly labeled and catalogued. There might be a chamber with an opening in the roof, used for observing the stars, and perhaps a garden where the priests cultivated the sacred plants used in their medicinal and magical preparations. It was within the walls of the Pharaohs that the great religious and funerary compositions, the very software of the Egyptian spiritual machine, were compiled, illustrated, and given their authority. In the Old Kingdom, its scholars composed the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, which were carved onto the walls of the Pharaoh's burial chamber to ensure his magical transfiguration. In the Middle Kingdom, they adapted these texts into the coffin texts, making this secret knowledge available to a wider elite. And in the New Kingdom, they created the various versions of the Book of the Dead, beautifully illustrated papyrus scrolls that were essentially personalized, magical guidebooks to the afterlife. These were not just books, but powerful magical tools, secret roadmaps of the underworld that provided the deceased with the specific spells and knowledge necessary to overcome the terrifying demons, pass through the guarded gates, and triumphantly achieve eternal life in the field of reeds. The scholars of the House of Life were also the keepers of medical knowledge. They were the authors of the great medical papyri, such as the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus. These remarkable documents reveal a level of medical understanding that was far in advance of its time. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is a stunningly rational and scientific text. It is a surgical treatise detailing the diagnosis and treatment of 48 different traumatic injuries, from skull fractures to spinal injuries. It describes the cases in a logical, systematic format. Title: Examination, Diagnosis, and Treatment. It shows a sophisticated, practical understanding of anatomy, and in one case, even correctly identifies the brain as the center of nervous control. The Ebers Papyrus, on the other hand, is a more comprehensive medical encyclopedia dealing with internal medicine, diseases of the eye, and skin conditions. It is filled with hundreds of prescriptions using a vast pharmacopoeia of animal, mineral, and plant substances. But it also contains numerous magical incantations to be recited alongside the physical treatments. For the Egyptian physician priests of the House of Life, there was no conflict between these two approaches. They believed that illness could be caused by both physical factors, like an injury, and supernatural factors, like the wrath of a god or the malice of a demon. A truly effective treatment, therefore, had to address both. The secret knowledge of both the effective herbal remedies and the powerful magical spells was a guarded secret of the Per-Ankh, passed down through generations of highly trained physician priests. Astronomy and astrology were another crucial area of study, a secret science used to read the intentions of the gods. The scholars of the House of Life meticulously observed and recorded the movements of the stars, the moon, and the planets. This had an immediate practical purpose. The Egyptian calendar, a solar calendar of 365 days, was a product of their observations of the star Sirius and was essential for administering the agricultural cycle and scheduling religious festivals. But their interest was also deeply religious. They believed that the sky was a divine text and that the movements of the celestial bodies held clues to the divine will. They developed a complex system of astrology to interpret these celestial omens and predict the future. This was a vital service for the Pharaoh, whose success and very life depended on his ability to act in accordance with the cosmic order. The beautifully decorated astronomical ceilings on tombs like that of Senenmut or Seti I, which depict the constellations, the planets, and the decans, star groups used for telling time at night, are direct visual representations of the secret cosmological knowledge that was cultivated and guarded within the House of Life. But perhaps the most important and most secret function of the House of Life was its role as a magical workshop. It was the primary center for the study and practice of Heka, the divine force of magic that underpinned the universe. The priests of the Per-Ankh were the master magicians, the Kerheb priests who knew the most potent spells, the secret names of the gods, and the deepest mysteries of creation. It was here that the magical texts were written, the ritual instructions were composed, and the enchanted amulets were created, all of which were used to protect the king, the state, and the temples from all harm, both seen and unseen. The priests of the House of Life were believed to have the power to heal the sick, to curse Egypt's enemies, to control the weather, and even in some myths to animate inanimate objects. The Westcar Papyrus, a collection of fictional stories set at the court of King Khufu, tells of a magician who was able to fold the waters of a lake back on themselves, and another who could reattach a severed head. While these are fictional tales, they reflect the awe and reverence in which the skills of these master priests were held by the general population. Their abilities were legendary because their knowledge was secret. The knowledge guarded within the House of Life was considered sacred and alive. The scrolls of papyrus were not just inanimate objects, but vessels of divine power. The act of copying a sacred text was a ritual in itself, a way of ensuring the eternal preservation of the divine words of the gods. The secrets contained within these texts were jealously guarded. Scribes and priests were likely sworn to secrecy, and the unauthorized dissemination of this knowledge would have been a grave crime. This secrecy was essential for maintaining the power and prestige of the intellectual elite and the state. If everyone knew the secrets of the gods, the authority of the Pharaoh and the priesthood, who were the sole intermediaries, would be completely undermined. The House of Life was also the ultimate source of royal propaganda and the architect of the state's identity. The scholars of the Per-Ankh composed the king lists that chronicled the official history of Egypt's dynasties carefully, editing them to erase problematic rulers like Akhenaten or Hatshepsut and to legitimize the current ruler's claim to the throne. They wrote the theological treatises that explained the divine nature of the pharaoh and his relationship with the gods. They designed the complex, multi-layered decorative programs for the temples and royal tombs, programs that were not just art, but powerful, three-dimensional text designed to broadcast and perpetuate the official royal ideology and the Egyptian conception of cosmic order. The influence of the House of Life extended to every corner of the kingdom. While its members were a small, exclusive group, their work defined the high culture of their civilization. They were the theologians, the scientists, the physicians, the artists, and the political theorists of their time. They created a unified body of knowledge and belief that gave Egyptian civilization its unique character and its remarkable stability over 3,000 years. The Per-Ankh was the hidden engine room of the Egyptian state, a secret society of intellectuals who wielded the power of the written word to shape reality, to heal the body, to guide the soul in the afterlife, and to sustain the eternal reign of the pharaohs. It was the place where knowledge became magic, and magic became the very substance of civilization itself. In the overwhelmingly male-dominated world of ancient Egypt, where public life and the highest offices of the state, pharaoh, vizier, general, were almost exclusively controlled by men, the temple provided a unique and powerful arena for women to wield immense influence and authority. While the priesthoods of most male gods were exclusively male, there were several crucial religious roles that could only be filled by women. These priestesses, from the local singers of a temple choir to the great matriarchs who held the title of God's wife of Amun, formed their own sacred fraternities. These were exclusive societies of women who held significant spiritual, political, and economic power, often operating in parallel to, and sometimes in concert with, the male power structures of the kingdom. They were keepers of their own sacred traditions and secrets, and at times their influence was so great that they could shape the destiny of the nation. To understand the potential for female power in Egypt, it is important to recognize that women in ancient Egypt enjoyed a relatively high status compared to their counterparts in other ancient societies. Legally, they were the equals of men. They could own and inherit property, run businesses, enter into contracts, and sue for divorce. This legal and economic independence provided the foundation upon which women of the elite class could build. Positions of significant power, particularly within the religious sphere. The most common and accessible religious role for women of high status was that of a musician or singer in a temple cult. Major temples throughout Egypt had a kenner, or musical troupe, which was often composed entirely of women from elite families. Their role was to provide the sacred music, chanting, and dance that accompanied the temple rituals. Music was not mere entertainment in ancient Egypt. It was considered a powerful tool for pleasing the gods, calming their anger, and creating a sacred atmosphere in which rituals could be effective. These women are often depicted in art playing the sistrum, a sacred rattle with metal discs whose distinctive sound was believed to soothe the anger of goddesses like Hathor and Sekhmet and to ward off evil spirits. They also used the menet, a heavy beaded necklace that was held and shaken as a percussion instrument. To hold the title Singer of Amun or Musician of Hathor was a position of great prestige. It allowed women to participate directly in the divine cult, to be in the presence of the god, and to earn their own income from the temple endowments. Beyond the role of musician, there were a number of true priestly offices held by women, particularly in the cults of goddesses. During the Old Kingdom, it was common for women of high rank to serve as priestesses of the goddess Hathor, one of the most important and beloved deities in the pantheon. As the goddess of love, beauty, music, motherhood, and joy, her cult was naturally associated with women. These priestesses managed the goddess's cult and her extensive estates, and they played a central role in the great festivals of Hathor, which were often joyous, music-filled, and even ecstatic events, such as the Festival of Drunkenness. However, the most powerful, most exclusive, and ultimately most politically significant female religious office in Egyptian history was that of the Hemet Neter en Amun, the god's wife of Amun. This position, which rose to prominence during the New Kingdom, was one of immense spiritual and political importance. The god's wife of Amun was the principal priestess of the cult of the state god Amun-Ra at Thebes. She was considered to be the divine consort of the god himself. In a theological sense, she was the partner of the god on earth, and her role was crucial in the divine legitimization of the king. The title was often held by the king's mother, his great royal wife, or his eldest daughter, directly linking the royal family to the immense power and wealth of the Amun cult. A famous example is Queen Hatshepsut, who held the title of God's wife before she took the unprecedented step of declaring herself Pharaoh. The role of the God's wife was not merely symbolic. She was the head of a vast and wealthy institution, a powerful corporation in her own right. She had her own estate, her own administration of scribes and officials, and her own independent income, all separate from that of the male-dominated Amun temple. She commanded a huge amount of economic power. Her primary ritual duty was to participate in the great religious festivals at Thebes. During the Opet festival, she would accompany the sacred bark of Amun on its journey from Karnak to Luxor Temple. Her most important and most secret ritual was likely performed during the beautiful feast of the valley. It is believed that she would perform a sacred divine union with the god Amun. This was not a physical act, but a secret rite that was believed to magically regenerate the creative forces of the cosmos, and most importantly, to ensure the divine conception and birth of the royal heir. The famous reliefs at Deir el-Bahari, which depict the divine birth of Hatshepsut, show the god Amun visiting her mother, Queen Amos, and conceiving the future queen. The god's wife was the earthly vessel for this critical moment of divine intervention, a ritual that was central to the ideology of divine kingship. The power of the god's wife of Amun reached its absolute apex during the Third Intermediate Period, after the New Kingdom had collapsed and Egypt was politically divided between a line of pharaohs in the north and the high priests of Amun in the south. In this era of fragmentation, the position was transformed into a tool of diplomacy and a source of immense personal power. The office of God's wife became a celibate one, ensuring that she would have no sons to complicate the succession. The title was now passed down not by birth, but by adoption. The reigning God's wife would legally adopt the daughter of the northern king as her successor. This created a powerful political link between the two halves of the country, with the gods. Wife of Amun at Thebes, acting as the key political player who held the fragmented country together. Rulers like Shepenupet II and Nitocris I governed southern Egypt as virtual kings. Their names were written in royal cartouches. They are depicted in reliefs with pharaonic authority, and they controlled the immense wealth of the Amun priesthood. They were, for a time, the most powerful individuals in the country, their authority both religious and political. The women who held the title of God's wife of Amun during this period formed a unique and exclusive dynasty of female rulers, a secret society of celibate matriarchs who wielded power in a way that was unprecedented in Egyptian history. Women also played a vital and often secret role in the funerary cults and the practice of magic. While the professional lector priests and the guild of embalmers were typically men, women were the primary mourners and the practitioners of domestic funerary rites. The quintessential image of an Egyptian funeral is that of the two professional mourning women who took on the ritual roles of the goddesses Isis and Nephthys, their loud, wailing laments and gestures of grief tearing their hair, beating their chests, and throwing dust on their heads were not spontaneous outbursts, but a ritualized and essential reenactment of the grief the goddesses had shown for the dead Osiris. Their powerful, dramatic performance was believed to be magically effective, helping the deceased in their difficult transition to the afterlife. In the realm of popular religion and magic, away from the great state temples. Women could also be powerful practitioners. Female magicians, healers, and wise women would have served their local communities, providing remedies, casting spells for fertility and love, interpreting dreams, and creating protective amulets. The great goddess Isis was the ultimate model and patron for these women. As the great of magic Weret Heka, who had resurrected her husband and protected her son from countless threats through her superior magical knowledge, Isis embodied female power, wisdom, and cunning. She was a powerful patron for all women who sought to use Heka to protect their families and control their own destinies in a world that was often dangerous and unpredictable. The sacred house of the priestesses was a world of female power, spirituality, and authority that existed within the broader patriarchal structure of Egyptian society. From the thousands of female musicians who filled the temples with sacred sound, to the powerful and wealthy gods' wives of Amun, who ruled as the gods' viceroys. On earth, these women were not passive observers of religion, but active and essential participants. They formed their own hierarchies, controlled their own institutions, and were the keepers of their own unique forms of secret, sacred knowledge. Their story is a crucial and often overlooked part of the hidden world of ancient Egypt, a testament to the fact that spiritual power was not exclusively a male prerogative, and that the path to the divine was open to both the sons and the daughters of the Nile. At the absolute center of the Egyptian universe, the pivot point between the divine and the mortal, stood the Pharaoh. He was the divine king, the living embodiment of the god Horus, the son of Ra, and the sole intermediary between the realm of the gods and the world of humanity. Surrounding this divine figure was the royal court, a complex, dazzling, and often perilous world of family, high officials, priests, servants, and sycophants. The court was the administrative heart of the kingdom, the grand stage upon which the great dramas of politics and power were played out. It was also, by its very nature, the most exclusive and secret society in all of Egypt. The inner circle of the king was a world of closely guarded knowledge, intricate and suffocating etiquette, and deadly intrigue, where proximity to the pharaoh meant immense power and unimaginable wealth, but where a single misstep, a careless word, or a rival's whisper could lead to utter ruin and a dishonorable death. The structure of the court was a series of concentric circles of access and influence, all revolving around the sacred person of the king. The innermost circle, the true heart of power, consisted of the royal family. This included the great royal wife, the king's mother, his children, and his other, lesser wives who lived in the royal harem. The great royal wife, who was often the king's full or half-sister, was a figure of immense religious and political importance. She was the female counterpart to the king's divine power, often associated with powerful goddesses like Hathor or Isis. She participated in crucial religious rituals alongside the king and often served as a key advisor and regent for a young heir. The king's mother, as the mother of the god, also held a position of great honor and could wield significant influence, particularly during the reign of her son. The royal harem or kenner was a powerful and self-contained institution. It was not simply a place of pleasure, but a major economic entity with its own workshops, agricultural estates, and administrative staff. It was the residence of the king's lesser wives, his concubines, and all the royal children. While it could be a place of luxury and ease, it was also a hotbed of ambition and political intrigue. The various wives, often foreign princesses sent to seal diplomatic alliances, would constantly vie for the king's favor, each hoping that her son would be chosen as the next heir to the throne. This intense competition could sometimes boil over into open conspiracy. The famous records of the harem conspiracy against Ramesses III, which have survived in a court document known as the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, reveal a detailed plot led by one of his lesser wives, Tai. She sought to assassinate the pharaoh and place her own son, Pentuer, on the throne. The plot involved high-ranking officials, military commanders, and even magicians who created wax figurines to magically curse the king. The plot ultimately failed, though it is possible Ramesses III died from an injury sustained in the attack, and the court records of the subsequent trial detail the grim fate of the dozens of conspirators who were either executed or forced to commit suicide. This dramatic event provides a rare and fascinating glimpse into the secret, high-stakes politics that festered behind the gilded walls of the royal household. The next circle of power was composed of the highest officials of the state, the men who actually ran the country on the king's behalf. The most powerful man in the kingdom after the pharaoh was the vizier or jati. The vizier was the king's prime minister, the head of the entire state bureaucracy, the chief justice of the land and the eyes and ears of the king. He was responsible for overseeing everything from the collection of taxes and the administration of the provinces to the management of the royal building projects and the reception of foreign embassies. The office of the vizier required immense skill, integrity, and an encyclopedic knowledge of the law. A text that survives from the New Kingdom, known as the Installation of the Vizier, details the solemn duties of the office. It instructs the vizier to be impartial, to treat the rich and poor alike, and to act always in accordance with the law, for it is an abomination of the god to show partiality. The vizier was the linchpin of the entire administration, the keeper of the most vital state secrets. Other key figures in the inner circle included the chief treasurer, who controlled the state's finances and the vast tribute that flowed in from the conquered lands of the empire, and the overseer of the granaries, who managed the kingdom's food supply, the ultimate basis of its wealth and stability. There was also the high steward, who was in charge of the king's personal estates and household, a position of great intimacy and trust that controlled access to the king himself. The great military leaders, the generals of the army, were also a powerful faction at court, especially during the imperial period of the New Kingdom. These men, the vizier, the treasurer, the generals, were the pharaoh's inner cabinet, his most trusted advisors who helped him to govern the kingdom. Their daily access to the king and their knowledge of the secrets of state made them immensely powerful, and their rivalries could shape the fate of the nation. Life at court was governed by an incredibly rigid and complex etiquette. Every interaction with the king was highly ritualized. One had to approach the divine pharaoh with the utmost reverence, prostrating oneself and kissing the ground before him. To speak out of turn, to fail to use the correct honorific title, or to make an unapproved gesture could be interpreted as a grave insult with deadly consequences. The language used at court was formal and filled with elaborate praise for the king. This strict protocol was not just about manners. It was a constant performance designed to emphasize the vast, unbridgeable gulf that separated the divine king from even his highest officials, reinforcing his unique and unapproachable status as a god on earth. One of the most important and most sensitive secrets of the court was the process of royal succession. The ideal promoted by royal ideology was for the pharaoh to be succeeded by his eldest son, born to the great royal wife. However, reality was often far messier. Infant mortality was high. Kings had many sons by different wives, and the choice of an heir was not always straightforward. To avoid a crisis, the reigning pharaoh would often select his chosen heir and elevate him to the position of co-regent, allowing him to learn the duties of kingship and ensuring a smooth transition of power upon the king's death. But this choice was not always clear, and the death of a king could unleash a furious power struggle between different branches of the royal family and the powerful court factions that supported them. The unconventional reigns of female pharaohs like Hatshepsut, who had to outmaneuver her young nephew to claim the throne, and the religious turmoil of the Amun-Ra period under Akhenaten are prime examples of the crises that could erupt when the normal line of succession was broken. These were times when the secrets of the court spilled out into the open, often with violent consequences. The court was also the primary audience for the high culture of the kingdom. The king was the great patron of the arts, and the finest craftsmen, artists, and scribes worked for the court, producing the magnificent jewelry, the colossal statues, the finely carved reliefs, and the sophisticated literary works that defined their age. This culture, however, was also a tool of the state. The art and literature produced for the court were designed to celebrate the king, to legitimize his rule, and to propagate the official royal ideology. The stories of the loyal official who serves his king faithfully and is rewarded with a beautiful tomb and a happy retirement were a common theme, a clear piece of propaganda designed to encourage loyalty and obedience among the elite. The royal court was a closed and privileged world, a secret society whose members were bound together by their shared access to the king and their participation in the governance of the empire. It was a world of immense wealth, breathtaking sophistication, and unparalleled power, but also one of constant anxiety, ruthless competition, and mortal danger. The secrets they kept, the true state of the treasury, the plans for military campaigns, the details of a treaty with the Hittites, the inner workings of the royal succession, were the most important secrets in the kingdom. To be a member of the circle of the king was to stand at the very center of the Egyptian universe, but it was also to live constantly on the edge of a knife, where the line between ultimate power and utter disgrace was perilously and terrifyingly thin. The civilization of the Pharaohs, a monument of cultural and political stability, endured for over 3,000 years. It was a testament to the resilience of its people, the richness of its land, and the profound power of its cultural and religious ideas. But no civilization, however great or seemingly eternal, is immune to the tides of history. As Egypt entered its long decline and was conquered by a succession of foreign powers, the Libyans, the Nubians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, and finally the Romans, its ancient temples began to crumble. Its sacred language was replaced, and its unique worldview slowly faded into obscurity. Yet, the vast body of secret knowledge that had been cultivated and guarded for millennia in the temples, the houses of life, and the inner sanctums of the royal court did not simply vanish with the last pharaoh. It seeped out into the wider Mediterranean world, leaving a deep and enduring legacy that would shape the course of Western thought in ways that are often unacknowledged. The rituals of its priests, the magic of its scribes, and the mysteries of its gods would be adopted, reinterpreted, and transformed, influencing the development of Western philosophy, religion, and esoteric traditions for the next 2,000 years. The secret societies of Egypt cast long and intricate shadows, creating echoes in the sand that can still be heard today. The first and most direct inheritors of Egyptian secret knowledge were the ancient Greeks. From the 6th century BCE onwards, Greek thinkers, historians, and mystics made the journey to Egypt, a land they viewed with immense awe as the ancient cradle of all wisdom. The historian Herodotus marveled at the piety of the Egyptians, their complex religious customs, and the antiquity of their civilization, which made his own Greek culture seem young and provincial by comparison. The philosopher Plato, in his dialogues such as the Timaeus, refers to the profound wisdom of the Egyptian priests, and is said by later writers to have studied in Egypt for several years. While it is difficult to separate historical fact from later legend, there is a strong and persistent tradition that many of the great figures of early Greek thought, including the mathematician Pythagoras and the philosopher Thales, received their education and their most important ideas from the priests of Egypt. Pythagoras, the enigmatic philosopher and mathematician, was said to have spent over 20 years in Egypt, where he was initiated into the Egyptian mysteries. His teachings on the immortality of the soul, the transmigration of souls, reincarnation, and the mathematical harmony of the universe all have strong parallels with ancient Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife and the cosmic principle of Mat. The Greeks saw Egypt as the source, the ancient wellspring of secret knowledge. The Greeks were particularly fascinated by the Egyptian mystery cults, especially the powerful and emotionally resonant mysteries of Osiris and Isis. As Egypt became a part of the Hellenistic world under the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek-speaking royal family, these cults began to merge and syncretize with Greek traditions. The god Osiris was identified with the Greek god of wine and ecstasy, Dionysus, another deity associated with death and rebirth. The god Serapis was a deliberate creation of the Ptolemies, a hybrid deity who blended the features of the Egyptian. Osiris Apis with Greek gods like Zeus and Hades in an attempt to create a unifying god for their mixed population. But it was the goddess Isis who truly captured the imagination of the Greco-Roman world. The cult of Isis spread like wildfire throughout the Mediterranean, becoming one of the most popular and powerful of all the Roman mystery religions. She was transformed from a specifically Egyptian goddess into a universal savior goddess, a compassionate and all-powerful queen of heaven, the goddess of 10,000 names. Her secret initiation rites, which promised personal salvation, purification from sin, and a blessed afterlife, appealed to people from all social classes, from slaves to senators. The ruins of her temples can be found from the shores of North Africa to the banks of the Rhine and the streets of Romang, London. This Romanized cult of Isis was one of the primary conduits through which the religious rituals and magical traditions of ancient Egypt were transmitted to the wider Western world. Another key figure in this transmission was the mythical Egyptian, sage Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the Thrice Great. This legendary figure was a syncretism of the Greek god Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods and guide of souls, and the Egyptian god Thoth, the wise ibis-headed god of writing, magic, and knowledge. During the Roman period, a large body of esoteric and philosophical texts, known as the Hermetic Corpus, was written in Egypt in the Greek language but was attributed to this ancient Egyptian sage. These texts are a complex and fascinating blend of Egyptian theology, Greek philosophy, particularly Platonism and Stoicism, and Jewish mysticism. They deal with profound subjects such as the nature of the one transcendent God, the creation of the cosmos, the fall of man from a divine state, and the path to spiritual regeneration and enlightenment or gnosis. The Hermetic texts claimed to be the secret wisdom of the Egyptian priests, the primordial revelation given by Thoth Hermes at the dawn of time. They became one of the foundational documents of Western esotericism, and their influence on later magical, alchemical, and mystical traditions is immense dot with the rise of Christianity and its establishment as the state religion of the Roman Empire. The ancient temples of Egypt were officially closed, and the old religion was suppressed. But the secret knowledge did not die. It went underground, preserved and transformed by various esoteric groups. Early Christian Gnosticism, which flourished in Egypt, shows clear signs of Egyptian influence in its complex cosmologies and its emphasis on secret knowledge, gnosis, as the key to salvation from the prison of the material world. The practice of alchemy, the Egyptian art, which also emerged in Greco-Roman Egypt, was deeply rooted in Egyptian traditions of metallurgy and temple ritual. The alchemist's quest to transmute base metals into gold was not just a chemical process, but a deeply spiritual one, a metaphor for the transformation and perfection of the human soul, a process that mirrored the magical transformation of the deceased in the process of mummification. The patron of alchemy was, of course, Hermes Trismegistus. During the Islamic Golden Age, Arab scholars in cities like Baghdad showed great interest in this ancient wisdom. They translated the Hermetic texts and other works of Greek and Egyptian wisdom into Arabic, preserving them and adding their own rich layers of interpretation. It was through these Arabic translations that much of this ancient knowledge was reintroduced to Europe during the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. When the Hermetic Corpus was translated into Latin by Marsilio Ficino in 15th century Florence, it caused an intellectual sensation. Renaissance thinkers believed they had rediscovered the Prisca Theologia, the pristine original theology given to man by God, the secret wisdom of the ancient Egyptian priests that predated even Moses and the Greek philosophers. This Egyptomania had a profound impact on Renaissance art, philosophy, and magic. Figures like the philosopher Giordano Bruno and the English Magus John Dee were all deeply influenced by the Hermetic tradition, and they laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution by combining magical and mystical inquiry with the empirical study of nature. The most famous modern inheritors of this Egyptian legacy are the various fraternities of Freemasonry. Freemasonry, which emerged in its modern, speculative form in the 18th century during the Age of Enlightenment, incorporated a vast amount of Egyptian symbolism and mythology into its rituals and degrees. The use of pyramids, obelisks, the all-seeing eye, reminiscent of the Eye of Horus, and the central story of the death and resurrection of the master builder Hiram-Ibif, which clearly echoes the myth of Osiris, all point to a deep and deliberate fascination with the secret wisdom of ancient Egypt. While there is no direct, unbroken historical lineage from the ancient Egyptian priesthoods to modern Freemasonry, the Masons saw themselves as the spiritual heirs of the ancient mystery schools, including those of Egypt, which they believed held the secrets to moral and spiritual enlightenment in the 19th and 20th centuries. Following Napoleon's expedition to Egypt and the decipherment of the hieroglyphs, a new wave of popular and esoteric Egyptomania swept across the West. This gave rise to new occult movements, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the Theosophical Society. These groups delved deeply into the magical and mystical traditions attributed to Egypt, reinterpreting them for a modern audience and cementing the image of Egypt as the ultimate source of secret, magical power. The secret societies of ancient Egypt, the priests, the magicians, the embalmers, the builders were the guardians of a powerful and ancient tradition of sacred knowledge. They believed their rituals and their secret texts were essential for maintaining the order of the cosmos. When their civilization fell, this knowledge was not lost, but was scattered like seeds in the wind. These seeds took root in new soil in the philosophies of Greece, the mysteries of Rome, the alchemy of the Arabs, and the esoteric fraternities of modern Europe. The echoes of the spells resided in the dark sanctuaries of Karnak, and the mysteries celebrated at Abydos can still be heard, transformed and reinterpreted in the esoteric traditions of the West. The search for the hidden wisdom of the Pharaohs is a quest that has never truly ended, a testament to the enduring power of these ancient ideas. Our journey through the hidden world of ancient Egypt's secret societies has come to a close. We have moved from the public spectacle of the Pharaoh's court into the shadowy recesses of the temple, the tomb, and the house of life. We have seen that behind the monolithic facade of pharaonic power, there was a complex network of exclusive groups, each guarding its own sphere of secret knowledge. We have met the keepers of Heka, the magicians and scribes who believed the written word could shape reality itself. We have entered the inner sanctum of the priests of Amun-Ra, who controlled a spiritual and economic empire from the sacred city of Karnak. We have followed the initiates of the Osirian mysteries, who sought the promise of eternal life by sharing in their god's resurrection. We have stood with the servants of Anubis in their workshops, privy to the arcane and sacred craft of mummification. We have lived in the secret village of the tomb builders, the artists who created masterpieces for eternity while sworn to secrecy. We have seen how these groups, from the all-powerful god's wife of Amun to the elite Medjay police, were the hidden pillars that supported the Egyptian state. These were not societies of conspirators plotting against the state, but rather integral parts of its structure, whose secrecy was the very source of their power and legitimacy. Their guarded knowledge of theology, of ritual, of magic, of science was the lifeblood of their civilization, the sacred trust that maintained the balance of and ensured the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. When the world of the Pharaohs finally faded, its secrets were not buried forever. They became the source of a powerful and enduring legend, the legend of Egypt as the fount of all mystical wisdom. This legacy carried through the Greek philosophers, the Roman mystery cults, and the esoteric fraternities of later ages has ensured that the echoes of these ancient secret societies continue to resonate. The search for the hidden knowledge of the Nile is a testament to the enduring power of these ancient ideas, a whisper from the past that still invites us to look beyond the veil into the mysteries of the human soul and the cosmos. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the silent, starlit wisdom of the temples of Egypt.